Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, muting the sound of boots on the frozen yard. Friedrich Adler's breath came in sharp bursts, each exhale turning white in the icy air. Colonel Kruger's voice cut through the quiet. "Adler, step forward." Friedrich's stomach twisted. Before him knelt a young woman in a torn wool coat, hands bound, her dark hair tangled with frost. Leah Weiss lifted her gaze, eyes locked on his, defiant and afraid. He remembered her face from a marketplace months ago, when her laugh had made him forget the uniform on his back. Now, the order was clear. One bullet, no hesitation. "Do it," Kruger commanded, his gloved hand resting on the holster. Friedrich's hand trembled on his pistol, the cold metal biting into his palm. The other soldiers watched, their breaths steaming in the frigid air. Somewhere beyond the camp wall, a church bell tolled, and in that moment, he realized there was no path back to the man he once was. The shot never came. Friedrich lowered his pistol slightly, his voice flat but steady. "She's worth more alive." Kruger's brow arched, a faint sneer curling his lips. "You think you can bargain with me?" Friedrich didn't answer, his gaze locked on Leah. The soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing the breach in protocol. Snow clung to her hair like a crown of ice, and in that frozen instant, she knew he had chosen defiance. Kruger stepped closer, breath sharp with tobacco. "One day, Adler, hesitation will kill you." The words lingered like frostbite, sinking into bone. Leah was dragged to her feet, her wrists biting against the rope as a guard yanked her toward the barracks. The wind rose, scattering snow into spirals, and Friedrich stood still, pistol in hand, heart pounding against a truth he could no longer bury. Inside the dim barracks, the air reeked of damp wood and unwashed bodies. Leah was shoved onto a narrow cot, her breath ragged. A guard muttered orders, boots thudding as he left. She stared at the splintered beams above, each creak whispering of lives worn away. Friedrich entered moments later, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes scanning for eavesdroppers. "You'll be questioned tomorrow," he murmured, his tone clipped. Leah's voice cracked. "Why didn't you kill me?" His jaw tightened, a shadow of guilt crossing his face. "I don't know yet," he said, though both knew it was a lie. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the thin glass panes. In the corner, a single candle flickered, its light catching on the steel badge over his heart. Kruger's office smelled of ink and smoke. Maps sprawled across the desk, red pins marking territories swallowed by the right. Otto Brandt stood at attention, eyes darting to the door. Kruger spoke without looking up. "Adler is becoming unreliable." Otto swallowed hard, his hand twitching at his side. "Sir, he's saved us before," he offered. Kruger's gaze finally rose, sharp as a blade. "Loyalty to me is not the same as loyalty to the right." A pause hung between them, thick and dangerous. Otto nodded, knowing refusal was not an option. Snow drifted past the window, each flake a silent reminder of how quickly men could vanish here. Friedrich walked the perimeter that night, boots crunching softly over snow. The camp lay in uneasy silence, broken only by distant dogs barking. He lit a cigarette, the ember briefly illuminating his drawn face. Each drag tasted of ash and guilt. Through the barrack's narrow window, he caught a glimpse of Leah, her head resting against the wall, eyes closed. The sight hollowed him in ways he couldn't name. A guard's footsteps approached, and Friedrich flicked the cigarette into the snow, the glow dying instantly. Above, the moon slipped behind a cloud, leaving the yard in shadows thick enough to hide 1,000 secrets. Morning limped into the barracks like a tired guard, and the frost clung to the window frame. Friedrich entered with a ledger he did not need, pretending bureaucracy. Leah watched him, jaw set, eyes rimmed red from cold. He said, "You will be moved for work intake," and his voice hardly carried. She said, "You saved me for a slower death," and the words struck clean. He swallowed, "If you breathe past today, I can change tomorrow." Footsteps passed outside, and he lowered his tone until it became breath. Memorize a storeroom key hanging by the laundry, he said, and fear sharpened his face. Leah nodded once, the nod small and fierce. He added, trust no one but the child with the blue scarf. She frowned. My sister Miriam has a red scarf. He flinched, realizing the risk, and corrected, then she must change it. The door creaked, and Otto Brandt appeared, rigid and watchful. Inspection, Otto said, and the room froze as if it shared one held breath. Kruger's office glowed with lamplight that made maps look like wet wounds. Otto stood with boots aligned to a seam in the rug, eyes on the floor. Kruger said, Adler hesitated yesterday, and today he whispers. Otto kept his breath, even and silent. The colonel tapped a pencil on a list of confiscated goods, then circled 2 names. There is a leak, he said, and the word tasted like iron. Otto looked up and met eyes that loved obedience more than air. He said, I will watch him, and hated how easy the promise felt. Kruger smiled with only half his mouth. You are loyal, and loyalty can be measured, he said. A pause pooled between them like oil. Kruger added, prove it by bringing me a name before midnight. Snow ticked against the window, and Otto heard his own pulse march. Laundry steam drifted through cracked panes, turning the air into a ghost. Leah worked beside older women, hands raw, eyes steady on the wall hook. The key hung dull as a promise, swaying with every door slam. A girl slipped in, coat too large, scarf dyed a flat blue with ink. Leah whispered, Miriam, and the girl's breath hitched like a sob. Miriam said, they took our names this morning, and clutched her threadbare sleeve. Leah replied, then take mine only when you must, and smiled without joy. She nudged a basket to block a guard's sightline. At end of shift, count to 20, then leave, she said. Miriam nodded, knuckles white on the scarf. A woman coughed, and boots clicked near the threshold. The key glimmered and went still like a heartbeat choosing to hide. In the yard, Friedrich found Otto smoking where rules like to be ignored. No, Otto said. Kruger counts breaths now, and ash fell like gray snow. Friedrich kept his gaze on the fence line. Then we must breathe quieter, he said, and forced a smile that died early. Otto studied him, eyes a shade too soft for safety. There is a name due by midnight, Otto said, and the words staggered between them. Friedrich replied, give him mine, and he will choke. Otto laughed once, short and wrong. I am not your confessor, he said, and flicked the cigarette. Friedrich stepped closer, the cold stitching their coats to the wind. You owe me from Minsk, he said, voice low. Otto's mouth twitched, memory slicing through warmth. I owe debts I cannot pay twice, he said, and walked off, carrying the smoke like a flag. Twilight pooled in the maintenance tunnel, where the laundry drains met stone. The air smelled of rust and wet cloth, and footsteps soaked into the dark. Leah waited with her palm on cold brick, counting heartbeats. A figure parted the shadows, coat hood low, gait deliberate and quiet. He said, Daniel, and she knew the name before he gave it. Daniel Horowitz kept his voice flat. There is a courier chain under the church, he said. Your sister goes first. Leah whispered, she will not leave me, and the words trembled. He answered, then you must leave together, or not at all. Behind them, a pipe ticked, and water hissed like a warning. Leah said, a guard watches with hungry eyes. And Daniel nodded once. Then feed him lies, he said, and placed a scrap of map in her hand. Dawn broke like a blade across the camp, as wagons lined for transfer. Leah stood among workers, hands raw, eyes lifted to the laundry eaves. Friedrich moved along the queue, clipboard raised as a shield against suspicion. He said, work detail 6 to the storeroom, and his tone masked urgency. A guard coughed, bored and cold, while snow powdered his cap brim. Leah stepped when he glanced away, and the rope at her wrists burned. She whispered, Miriam waits under the drain, and the words steadied her feet. Friedrich replied, go at the bell, and the risk tasted of copper. Otto watched from the shed, jaw tight, breath slow enough to hide doubt. He said to no one, a name before midnight, and felt the sentence bite. The bell clanged, loud as a verdict, and bodies shifted like cattle. Leah slipped through steam and shadow, heart beating the map's edges. Friedrich closed his list and followed, carrying a silence he could not drop. The storeroom smelled of soap and fear, with shelves like silent guards. Leah found the key where Frost had lacquered the nail. It felt heavier than hope. She said 20 beats and counted as footsteps thudded beyond the door. Miriam slid from a stack of linens, eyes bright with terror and trust. I dyed it right, she said, clutching the blue scarf as if it held sky. Leah kissed her forehead and tasted salt from cold sweat. We go to the tunnel, she said, and the word tunnel felt like prayer. The latch clicked, and a shadow fell across the sliver of light. Friedrich entered, pulse loud enough to hear. 2 minutes, he said, and the clock in his head screamed. Leah replied, if we are seen, make it look like inventory. Miriam nodded, small and fierce, and gathered a basket. The three moved as one breath, thin and necessary in the brittle air. They reached the maintenance tunnel, where pipes clicked like teeth in a cold mouth. Daniel waited with the map folded to a tier along the church lane. He said, the patrol shifts at the half hour, and his breath mapped the air. Leah asked, can you get 2 out tonight? And her voice dared the echo. Daniel answered, I can get 3 if the third stops being a uniform. Friedrich looked at his hands and saw the stain of orders he had obeyed. He said, I am not worth your corridor, and the words cost him a rank of lies. Daniel studied him, eyes like knives wrapped in cloth. Then buy it, he said. Buy it with the time you stole yesterday. Miriam tugged Leah's sleeve. I can run faster, she said, young and certain. Boots rang overhead, and dust drifted like old snow. Leah whispered, we move now, and their fear became a single, shared pulse. Otto found the tunnel door ajar, and felt the world tilt by a degree. He stepped inside, and heard voices like threads pulling taut. He said, Adler, and the name echoed as if it belonged to a stranger. Friedrich turned, mouth set for penance he could not pay. Otto raised his pistol, but kept the barrel on memory, not flesh. He said, Kruger wants a name, and the chamber clicked like a clock. Leah moved between the men as if she had always lived in that space. If you shoot, the tunnel swallows us all, she said, and her calm cut clean. Miriam squeezed Leah's hand and stared at the gun with childish fury. Daniel shifted, stance loose, ready to break the darkness. Otto sighed, and the sound contained a winter's worth of regret. Minsk, he said, as if the city might answer. He lowered the pistol by an inch, and let doubt write the rest. The church cellar opened like a lung exhaling incense and dust. Candles bled light on crates that hid a narrow crawl to the street. Daniel whispered, after the bell, turn left twice, and press the map into Leah's palm. Friedrich said, I will draw patrols toward the yard, and the choice shook him. Leah touched his sleeve, a touch brief as a blink. Do not die trying to be forgiven, she said, and the sentence warmed the cold. Miriam pulled the scarf tighter and lifted her chin. We will look back from the road, she promised, and it sounded like hope. Boots thumped above, and a hymn rose thinly through floorboards. Otto appeared in the stair shadow and paused as if at a cliff. He said, You did not hear my name, and the air decided to be kind. The bell tolled, and the cellar breathed them toward the night. Snow swallowed the streets beyond the church, muffling the clatter of boots in pursuit. Leah gripped Miriam's hand as they darted between shadowed walls, breath sharp and visible in the frigid air. Daniel led them into an alley choked with crates, glancing back only once. We hold here, he whispered, his voice stripped to necessity. Miriam's scarf fluttered, a pale blue slash against the dark. Leah pressed her sister close, feeling her shiver. From the alley mouth, a beam of light swept past, grazing brick and snow. Friedrich appeared, moving with urgency, eyes searching for the three. "Pearls to the east," he said, his voice low but urgent. Daniel asked. "And Kruger?" Friedrich's jaw clenched. "Hunting ghosts," he replied. Above them, a church bell groaned, and for a moment the world felt balanced on its final ring. Friedrich pressed a folded pass into Leah's palm. "It's forged for factory transfer," he said, eyes fixed on hers. Leah studied him, torn between trust and fear. "Why do this now?" she asked. "Because tomorrow may not exist," he replied. Miriam tugged at Leah's sleeve, her gaze drawn to a shadow moving along the rooftops. Daniel followed her eyes and cursed under his breath. "Scouts," he said, already scanning for another way out. The air thickened with the sound of boots crunching snow nearby. Friedrich turned to Daniel. "North Street is barricaded. West leads to the river," he said. "Then west," Daniel answered, voice clipped. Leah nodded, hiding the pass in her coat lining. The shadow above shifted again, and a faint metallic click cut through the wind. They reached the riverbank, its surface frozen in jagged plates that groaned under the wind. A wooden skiff lay tied under the dock, shadowed from the street. Daniel said, "We can cross where the ice is thick," his breath trailing. Leah eyed the dark expanse and shook her head. "She's too light, the wind will push her," she said, pulling Miriam close. Friedrich stepped forward. "I'll go first and break the path," he offered. Miriam whispered, "I can do it," but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Otto emerged from the dark, breathless. "East patrol's turning," he said. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You followed us," he accused. Otto ignored him and glanced at Friedrich. "You're out of time." The wind carried the distant bark of a dog, and urgency settled like lead. The ice groaned under each step, cracks spidering in slow motion beneath the weight. Friedrich led, bootfalls deliberate, eyes scanning for darker patches. Leah followed with Miriam clutched close, her breath catching at every sound. Daniel brought up the rear, his stance wide for balance. Midway across, a rifle cracked from the shore, the shot shattering into the night. Ice splintered near Friedrich's feet, sending a shockwave through the group. "Faster!" Daniel hissed, though speed risked disaster. Miriam whimpered but didn't stop, her small boots slipping. Another shot rang out, echoing over the frozen expanse. Friedrich turned, pistol drawn, scanning the shore through the swirling snow. Shadows shifted near the docks, and the air burned with cold and danger. They stumbled onto the far bank, lungs burning, hands stiff from the cold. The gunfire had ceased, but shouts carried faintly across the river. Friedrich knelt, catching his breath while Leah checked Miriam's hands for frostbite. Daniel scanned the tree line. "The church safe house is half a mile north," he said. Otto appeared last, crossing with uneven steps, his face pale under the moon. "Kruger's close," he said, and it was half warning, half confession. Leah met Friedrich's gaze. "This is where we part," she said, her voice steady. Friedrich swallowed hard, his breath visible in the moonlight. "Stay ahead of the dogs," he replied. Miriam looked back at the broken ice, her eyes reflecting both relief and fear. The safe house was a crumbling parsonage, its windows boarded and its walls breathing cold drafts. Daniel guided Leah and Miriam inside, the candlelight shaking in his grip. "We stay until dawn," he said, voice hoarse from the river wind. Miriam sank onto a bench, pulling the scarf around her like armor. Leah moved to the window, peering through a slit in the boards. Friedrich stood just beyond the doorway, hesitant, snow clinging to his coat. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel warned. "If Kruger finds you, we're all done." Friedrich stepped in anyway, shutting the door against the howl outside. "If I leave, he'll hunt you faster," he said. Leah turned toward him, shadows dancing across her face. "Then you've already chosen a side," she murmured, the truth heavy between them. Friedrich leaned against the wall, the flicker of the candle tracing lines of exhaustion on his face. "Kruger knows about Minsk." Otto's voice broke the stillness, surprising them from the shadows of the hall. Daniel's hand went to his coat pocket, but Friedrich raised a palm. Why warn us? Leah asked, eyes narrowing. Otto exhaled slow. Because Minsk is why I never shot him, he said, nodding toward Friedrich. Miriam's gaze darted between the men, confusion flickering. You saved him once, she whispered. Otto's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. And I regret it, every day. Silence hung heavy, broken only by wind scraping the shutters. Daniel said, regret won't keep us alive, decisions will. Outside snow deepened, erasing the road like a careful hand wiping ink. Daniel spoke over the map spread on the table. We go through the orchard, then the rail yard. Leah traced the route with a finger, her nail clicking on the paper. And the patrol, she asked. 2 guards at the switch tower, Friedrich said. Miriam tilted her head. We can slip through if they change shift. Otto gave a short laugh. If, he said, the word sharp, boy. Leah met his gaze, steady. We've lived on ifs, she replied. Daniel folded the map, sliding it into his coat. We move before first light, he decided. The candles sputtered, casting the orchard path in shadow like a warning. Pre-dawn frost clung to the orchard branches, each twig etched in silver. The group moved in single file, boots muffled by snow. Leah held Miriam close, their breaths sensing in the frigid air. Friedrich scanned the tree line, pistol in hand, every sound magnified. Otto walked last, his eyes darting back toward the road. Keep moving, Daniel urged, voice barely above the wind. In the distance, the faint whistle of a train broke the quiet. Rail yards awake, Friedrich muttered. Miriam's scarf snagged on a low branch, and Leah freed it quickly, heart hammering. Beyond the orchard, the skeletal shapes of train cars loomed, their steel catching the first gray hint of morning. The rail yard reeked of coal and cold iron. Steam hissed from idle engines, curling upward into the pale dawn. They moved between freight cars, shadows stretching across gravel. Switch towers there, Daniel pointed, eyes narrowing. 2 guards paced in slow, practiced arcs. Friedrich whispered, shift change in 2 minutes. Leah tightened her grip on Miriam's hand. Otto adjusted his collar, muttering, 2 minutes feels like a lifetime. The distant clang of metal signaled the change, and the guards turned their backs. Now, Daniel hissed. They crossed quickly, the rail beneath their feet biting with ice. Behind them, a dog barked, the sound slicing the thin morning air. Beyond the rail yard, the ground sloped toward a frozen canal lined with skeletal willows. Leah guided Miriam along the bank, her boots sinking into crusted snow. Daniel scanned the far bridge. That's the last crossing, he said, voice taut. Friedrich kept close, pistol low, his eyes sweeping rooftops. Otto's breath came in white bursts, his gaze darting to shadows behind them. They're not far, he warned. Leah looked over her shoulder, dark shapes moved where the yard vanished into morning haze. Miriam's grip tightened on her sister's coat. We can't outrun dogs, she whispered. Friedrich replied, then we outrun their masters. The canal ice groaned as they neared the bridge, the sound carrying like a warning into the pale air. The bridge's timbers creaked under their weight, each step echoing against the frozen water. Daniel moved first, his boots landing in deliberate rhythm. Leah followed, keeping Miriam close, their steps nearly silent. Halfway across, Friedrich stopped, eyes fixed on the far bank. A figure emerged from the mist, Kruger flanked by 2 soldiers, their rifles already raised. Adler, Kruger's voice carried like a blade across the ice. Friedrich didn't answer, his grip on the pistol tightened. Otto froze behind them, caught between 2 worlds. Miriam's breath came quick, her scarf trembling in the wind. Daniel's voice was a low growl. We finish this now. Snowflakes spun through the still air, waiting for the first shot. Kruger stepped forward, his boots cracking the ice at the bridge's edge. You disgrace the uniform, he said to Friedrich, his tone almost calm. Friedrich answered, the uniform disgraced itself. Leah's hand tightened on Miriam's shoulder. Daniel shifted his weight, ready to move. Otto's voice cracked the silence. "This ends here," he said, but no one knew which side he meant. Kruger's eyes flicked to him, then back to Friedrich. "Bring me the girl," he ordered, gesturing toward Leah. Snow swirled between them, muffling the tension. Friedrich raised his pistol higher. "You'll take no one," he said, the words solid as ice. The rifles on Kruger's flank began to lift. The first shot cracked through the morning, splintering a railing post. Daniel lunged, shoving Leah and Miriam toward the far end. Friedrich fired back, dropping one of the soldiers. Kruger's pistol barked, and ice shards exploded at their feet. Otto moved suddenly, stepping between Kruger and the fleeing women. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice breaking. Kruger's eyes narrowed, and in that flicker of distraction, Friedrich advanced, forcing him back toward the bank. Daniel's hand gripped Leah's arm, urging her forward. Miriam stumbled but kept moving, breath ragged. The bridge shook with the chaos of boots and gunfire, the cold air thick with cordite and snow. They burst off the bridge into a grove of frost-hardened birch trees, the gunfire fading into the distance. Leah's lungs burned, her arm tight around Miriam. Daniel scanned behind them, his breath white in the cold. Friedrich stumbled into the grove, blood streaking his sleeve. Otto emerged last, his face pale but eyes set. "You bought us minutes, not hours," Daniel warned. Leah touched Friedrich's arm, her fingers coming away red. "We can't stop here," she said. Miriam whispered, "Where will we go now?" Friedrich looked toward the distant hills. "Farther than they can follow," he answered. Somewhere behind them, the bridge groaned as if remembering the fight. The ruined paper mill crouched by the canal like a wounded animal, its windows blown to teeth. Dawn bled along the horizon, thin and cold. Leah pressed linen to Friedrich's arm, and her hands shook despite her will. Miriam stood watch at a gap in the wall, blue scarf tucked close. Daniel laid out cartridges on a torn ledger, counting the minutes with his eyes. "Tracks in the birch grove," he said, voice flat with certainty. Friedrich whispered, "Kruger won't stop," and the words seemed to frost the air. Leah said, "Then we finish it," and felt the vow harden in her chest. Otto paced the shadows, jaw locked, listening to a wind that carried dogs and orders. "He wants a theater," Otto muttered. "We give him a closed curtain." Leah met Friedrich's gaze, and fear bent into something harder than steel. Outside, the river ice cracked like a distant verdict. Kruger's whistle cut the morning, and boots fanned along the river road. Otto stopped pacing and faced the others as if stepping onto a scaffold. "He owns my file," he said, throat raw. "My sister in Leipzig, ration fraud prison if I disobey." Friedrich stared, memory catching on Minsk like barbed wire. "You fed him names," he said. Otto nodded once, the nod more wound than answer. Leah whispered, "You can end it here," and the mill seemed to lean closer. Daniel slid a revolver across a crate. "Choose," he said, and the metal kissed wood. Miriam's eyes burned with a courage she had not asked for. "No more ifs," she said, almost steady. Otto picked up the weapon and exhaled the last of his excuses. "Tell her I paid," he said to nobody and everybody at once. Outside, the whistle died, replaced by the soft click of safeties. Kruger strode into the yard, black leather cutting a hard line through the snow. "Adler," he called, voice smooth as ice on a blade. Fighters took positions behind sacks and shattered presses. Friedrich stepped out, shoulders squared against the cold and his past. Kruger smiled thinly. "You think history will remember your mercy," he said. "It remembers the victors." Friedrich answered, "Then let it remember what they killed." Shots cracked, violent and bright. Daniel flanked left, drawing fire with a clean arc of movement. Leah fired from the window, each recoil an oath. Miriam fed cartridges with shaking hands and brave fingers. Otto rose in the open, shouting, "Here!" and the rifles swung to him like hounds. The mill exploded in echoes, snow leaping at every impact. Kruger pivoted toward Leah's window, pistol steady, eyes bright with certainty. Otto stepped into the line of fire, and the shot lifted him backward like a torn page. Leah gasped, and the next bullet from Friedrich found Kruger's shoulder. Daniel charged, slamming the commander into a shattered post. Snow blew sideways, a white curtain over iron and blood. Kruger swung a knife. Steel flashed, and Daniel grunted, then drove him hard to the ground. "Run!" Daniel barked to Leah, voice ragged but iron. Miriam pulled at her sleeve, eyes wide with grief and fire. Otto's breath rattled, a failing engine. "Leipzig," he mouthed, and the word broke in two. Friedrich kicked Kruger's pistol away and aimed, hand steady at last. Silence fell in shards, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Kruger lay still, snow swallowing the dark around him. Daniel pressed a rag to his side and waved them on. "Rode through the pine brake," he said, breath thin but unbent. Leah knelt by Otto and closed his eyes with two steady fingers. "Paid," she said softly, granting him the word he wanted. Friedrich stood at the yard's edge, smoke drifting from his pistol like a tired prayer. Miriam took Leah's hand and faced the river path, blue scarf bright against ash and frost. "What are we now?" Miriam asked, voice small and endless. Leah said, "Alive," and the word carried the weight of graves and mournings. They walked into the pale light as the mills slumped behind them, and history for a moment forgot to speak.